I think the stakes are really high if you make the wrong choices or if you get bad advice. So, obviously you have to study this. You'd have to study, the site and the potential for a site a lot before you really invested that amount of money. And obviously there's a lot of due diligence. So if you get it wrong, then definitely the stakes are very high. If you're the first one to get in there and you get it right, then I think it's a pretty reliable return on your investment.
It's so funny because you sound like you're talking about the board game right now, but you're actually talking about real life. The winner of the International Gamers Award was a game about being a water engineer.
All right.
And that's your job, isn't it?
Well, it's more or less my job. I'd say I'm a hydrologist. So I work with water. I do a fair amount of water engineering, but yeah. I've worked on hydropower schemes. I think mostly in Europe, but a little bit in Nepal and northern India. So not building the dams, but looking at the potential to generate energy. But I am actually working on one project in India, which is more like barrages. It's diverting water for irrigation, but the dams is the oldest in the world, I think, more or less. It was built in I think the Chola dynasty in Tamil Nadu. But when they didn't have the technology, I mean, on these big rivers, I mean, they like building the pyramids, they just would have got thousands of people, putting stones and mud across the river during the dry season and beginning to create dams, which are still here today, still being used.
Still being used. Wow. Yeah. What board games have you played?
Not many board games, to be honest. I've played Risk and Monopoly and all the old traditional, all the old timer games. But I have played a fair amount of computer games. A lot of Civilization.
Okay, wow, that's a heavy game. That's a lot heavier than this game. Yeah. It's a science fiction theme. There's USA, France, Italy, and Germany all vying to start hydroelectric power in the Alps.
Well, it's not too dissimilar from the scramble for hydropower in parts of Asia around the Himalayas.
There's these kind of energy lines and they're really long. And so that just sparks my mind immediately because the energy is like rooted a long way away from where the dam is,
And, transmission grids could stretch in theory across a whole continent. Having a big grid is a nice idea if it's about sharing energy and balancing. But, sadly, you could still have local people living near a dam site who don't have any electricity. So a lot of the countries around China, for example, so China's famous for the Three Gorges Dam, right? So an enormous scheme. China's always very interested in building hydropower dams on rivers like the Salween in the Upper Mekong, these kinds of rivers. And a lot of the time, the game is to build the dam and send 90% of the power back to China. I can't remember the name of the dam, but one of my colleagues was involved in building, I think, the biggest dam in Africa, or at least the highest dam in Africa. Okay. So yeah, I mean, they're enormous projects involving enormous amount of labour and a huge amount of concrete. Yeah, obviously you've got to get it right. Okay, so the worst thing that can happen to a dam is that the dams have things called spillways, which take the excess floodwater And of course, the worst thing that can happen to a dam is that it can, spillway can fail, and the whole dam could fail, and then that's of course catastrophic for anyone living downstream. So you got to get your concrete right, Terry. That's important.
All right. How would you say that word?
Barrage.
Really? I thought you said it like barrage.
The building dams upstream, of course, is very, very topical, Terry. So I don't know if you've heard of the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia.
Nope.
No. So the Grand Renaissance Dam is an enormous dam in the Upper Nile, and of course, Egypt aren't very happy about that idea. So, caused warfare between two countries. It's kind of that serious when you're talking about rivers like the Nile.
Yeah, because obviously the Nile, Egypt's further down the Nile, and then this is the source of the Nile is in Africa. It's in Uganda, isn't it?
Well, it's got two main tributaries, Uganda, and one is up more in Ethiopia. So do you get a certain amount of water each go, or is there sort of a roll of the dice that affects your ability to play? How does that work?
Right. Well, this is a heavy strategy game, so there's not a lot of randomness. You can see the water at the top of the headstream, it's called, and so you know what's coming. Actually, you can see all 4 rounds. You can see the whole game is mapped out. You can see it at the top.
So for the strategy, it's just it's an aspect of where you decide to put your money or put your resources in that go, right?
Yeah, it's called worker placement. You basically have those little engineers,
right? Okay.
And whenever you're taking a turn, you're thinking, what does Steve want? Because if I go, hey, can I get that spot and that spot? I think a game does need a bit of randomness to give it a bit of life. So to have 0 randomness, I don't really sort of enjoy those kind of abstract games. But I think that comes in this game comes from a different few sources. The main one is the contracts. Now that's relevant to your line of work, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not operating at the level of such enormous contracts, but yeah, I mean, there's competition in winning work.
Headstreams, base dams, elevations, conduits. Does that all sound? Excavators, concrete mixers. How's this theme sounding?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. They're all the main components, I suppose, to a big project. Yeah, I mean, particularly this whole thing about positioning of your dam above someone else's dam. If they've committed resources to a place, and then you commit resources upstream, then that's pretty cutthroat. Yeah, and in the real world, the dam game is a massive. There's a lot of trade-offs and a lot of issues with everything from where you place your dam to then how you use that water, because like water could be used for all kinds of things, right? It's not just about generating power, it's also about growing food and public water supply and leaving enough in the environment. So yeah, it's a huge area of sort of trade-offs and gaming with what you do.
Wow.
with dams. So I could imagine that that kind of game could be made even more elaborate if you wanted to.
You could bring in a farming element. Yeah, that could great. I can see this combining Agricola, my favorite game, with Barrage. I mean, what does the energy depend on?
The energy depends on what they call the head, in the sense the height of the water. If you've got 400 meters of water sitting above a turbine, that's going to generate much more power than say 10 meters of water. So the amount of head's really important. So it's an interesting concept for a game, because it's high stakes. It's a high stakes business, and I think there's definitely competition between countries. There's competition between engineering companies. There's competition between different stakeholder groups with different interests. So yeah, it's also probably reflects some real world strategy as well. So I'd be interested to play it when we can, Terry. So.
Cool.